Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our next session. We're excited to have you join us. Thank you to USDA for giving us that great panel earlier, and we're looking forward to the new information we'll share throughout the day. Next, I want to introduce two great organizations. They're doing a lot of work in rural communities. We have Rural by Choice first with Marcy Pinner, and she's going to share with us some work she's been doing in Kansas. Before she gets started, I just want to share with you that for those of you logging on through Whova, there's a chat and a Q&A session off to the right of your screen where you can communicate with those. The Q&A you all can discuss between each other there, and there's also conversation in the chat. We don't know if we'll have time for a Q&A, a live Q&A with all of our speakers today, but they'll also be aware of the questions coming up so they can always revisit later to discuss with you. So first, Marcy Pinner is the co-director of the Kansas Sampler Foundation. She's also an author, facilitator, and promoter. Her and her father founded the 501c3 nonprofit to sustain rural culture by educating Kansas about Kansas and networking and supporting rural communities. Marcy has been to every one of the 626 incorporated cities in Kansas twice for research purposes. Her projects range from writing Kansas guidebooks to organizing and facilitating state conferences. Marcy believes in the relevance of peer-to-peer training, energy of collective brilliance, and the involvement of every age group and the power of network. Marcy, will you please share with us?
I will. It's so good to be with you all. And I am speaking to you inside this barn that you see. And even though we don't have sunflowers right now, we are located on a farm outside of a small town of 1,100. The Kansas Sampler Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit. We have 2.5 employees right now, which includes a part-time bookkeeper. Our mission is to preserve and sustain rural culture, and I am excited to tell you what rural culture means. I think it's the first thing I can share with you about placemaking. So when Dad and I first started writing Kansas guidebooks in the early 90s, we would travel the state and would go to a town and say, what do you have in your town that we could put in a guidebook for free? And so often they would say, we don't have anything in our town, go to the next town. And after a while, that pattern started to feel a little disturbing. So Dad and I came up with a formula to help these towns see themselves with new eyes. We came up with these 8 rural culture elements which helps a town see itself. Every town has these things. Even if there's nothing left, they have a story about these things. There's architecture, which is the built environment, anything from a stone arched bridge and windmill to a church to a downtown building or residence. Art is anything in the art world. Commerce is about businesses past and present. Cuisine is about local eateries or ethnic recipes, church suppers, anything to do with food. Customs is the things we do every day that makes our town unique. It could be events. It could be that you have a bell that rings every day at noon or something unique about your town. Geography is everything about the natural world, from the sky to the soil to mountains to oceans. History is self-explanatory, and people is either the present day people or people of the past that may help make your town unique. So if a town thinks about these categories, you see yourself differently. A big town, everything in your town can fit in these categories. And a small town, like I said earlier, just think about these things. Your town has had a story about each of these things at some point. So everything we've done at the Kansas Sampler Foundation since we started is about these rural culture elements. I do presentations using these as my guide, and I'll show you something here. So after a few years, we decided to do a contest called the 8 Wonders of Kansas that was based on these 8 rural culture elements. We wanted to do something to educate the public, to help them think about what their state had. So we did a contest, excuse me, an online contest for each element. For instance, we started with architecture, and we, with a committee, came up with 24 finalists about architecture in the state. We put these online, and for 3 months, we let people vote and think about these finalists of architecture. People were only allowed to vote twice. We didn't believe in stuffing the ballot box to determine a winner, so only voting twice. And we went through each of these elements 3 months at a time. And at the end, we did an overall 8 Wonders of Kansas. And people follow these 8 wonders. They use them as their trip guides. It's really worked well. When we were done with the contest, people said, okay, now could you do a guidebook so we can have all these places in one book, easy to find? And we did that. It's like a coffee table book, and people use it to just get out and around Kansas. The interesting thing that happened with these 8 Wonders of Kansas is that communities started to do their own 8 wonders, or school teachers did it as projects for their community, or counties did it. So it really was a great way to help people look at their own area with new eyes. So we've also done Kansas guidebooks. And before I tell you about these guidebooks, I want to tell you a little bit about our population in Kansas. Of the 627 incorporated cities, 75% of them have less than a 1,500 population. And in Kansas, that category is mostly where you find our volunteer-led communities. And so no one is paid to help figure out how to sustain a town. So when we went to every incorporated city in Kansas to research for these guidebooks, because we aren't really a tourism marketing organization, we used that opportunity to learn many other things about the towns and how they worked, common issues that we could work on year-round to help sustain the town. But as you might imagine, these small towns, even though we gave them the rural culture elements, they didn't always think that they had something worthy of a guidebook. But early on, Dad and I had come up with the explorer tourism concept to really make all these little nuances and interesting little things in a small town that maybe a town doesn't think it's much. But when you start adding them together and you can go from town to see these things, then it becomes something worthy of being in a guidebook. We also started a Kansas Explorers Club to help create a thoughtful audience for rural communities. In these guidebooks, we didn't include every incorporated city in Kansas because then the readers maybe wouldn't trust us. But in this last one, we ended up including 500 of the towns with quality pictures, 1,600 pictures in the last guidebook, and 4,800 things to see and do, including many, many locally owned restaurants. But these guides work as a means to help people get around the state, even our small towns. So there's lots of explorery attractions in these things that I think every town, no matter the state, has these things if you start to value them and look at them with explorer eyes. In the beginning, we had a Kansas Sampler Festival where we brought all the people in the state who wanted to promote together in one place. And then the public would come, and in one day at one place or over a weekend, they could get information to attractions all over the state. After 27 years of doing that, we decided we needed something a little more active. a way to get people more out there into Kansas. So we came up with the Big Kansas Road Trip. So every year we choose 3 counties as a showcase, and and we invite the public to come crawl all over those towns for 4 days. It's sort of like a tri-county open house. All we ask of the communities is to be good at being themselves. And what we have found out is that the public loves these firsthand rural experiences, just seeing these communities as they are. And over the years, the communities have become really good at telling their story through small activities. Like this year, the small town of Munden invited the public to come have kolaches and coffee with them at the place where they have coffee every day. At another place, Formosa, a town of 100, they opened their wooden floor roller rink early, so that early in the season, so that the Big Kansas Road Trip people could come enjoy it. There was a line out the door. It was like a human demolition derby, and people just so enjoyed what this small town of 100 people, what they did all the time, and they invited us in to enjoy this custom of roller skating with them. If you want to see how we do this, go to the website bigkansasroadtrip.com, and you'll see how we promote it. We also put out a print guide that people study way in advance to help them figure out where they're going to go in their 1 day on the road or 4 days. It's really become successful. Many people had their best weekend ever, like the cafe, the microbrewery, other places. So it's really been valuable to these communities and businesses. Really, the last thing I want to talk to you about is the Power Up movement. So when I went to every town in the state in the early 2000s, one thing I noticed was that the towns that had under 40s involved, either as in their leadership or in businesses, those towns were thriving in a way that other towns weren't. And so I kept watching for that. And after the trip was over, after we had put out a guidebook, I put out a call to many of those young people that I had met and brought them together, and we started talking about their common issues. In the end, we called them power ups. That definition is that they are 21 to 39 and rural by choice. And those words, rural by choice, make all the difference. It doesn't mean you just live in rural. It means you live there intentionally. So some of the common issues we found in those people was that they might have gone to college, might have got their master's degree and came back, and people would see them as losers because they, it's like, why are you back in this small town? And that was something that others had felt. So once we started getting these young people together, they started feeling better about themselves and better about their choice. And it's started to become a thing. So at conferences, we've done things like had all the young people under 40 in the room come up to the front, and they would cross the stage one at a time, and they'd say, my name is blank, and this is what I do, and this is why I love living rural. And they'd end up saying, and I'm rural by choice. At one event that we did that at, the first time we did it, people were actually quite emotional in the audience. And when it was over, they stood up and cheered, because so often that age group is almost invisible in our conferences, in our communities. And as we talk about it more, we encourage communities to see these people, to ask what they're thinking, to get their ideas. In our estimation, it will be these 21 to 39s who keep our communities alive and thriving. And not just that they do things for themselves, but that they do things in a way that will be good for every age, that will help our communities be stronger for every age. The last thing I want to say about this is that a couple of years ago, I was able to interview 175 young people between the ages of 21 to 39 and ask them why they were staying in rural communities or why they had left, what they need to be happy. And we ended up writing a report, which I think will be in the chat room, or you can contact me at marcy@kansassampler.org. But we are working on this as a movement to impact people of every age in rural communities. So I hope you've learned something from this presentation. I think maybe the best thing that I can tell you about is those rural culture elements. They really help a community see themselves with new eyes and get excited about who they are and what they might have to offer. So I'm going to tie it up here, and I will turn it over now to our next presenter. Thank you so much.
Hello. Hello, everyone. I'm Peg Elmer Huff, coming to you from lovely Cabot, Vermont. Can you see me? You can't see me yet.
I can see you, Peg.
Okay, good. Well, it's amazing to see the geographic and employment range of all of you who are attending. And Lynn and I really want to thank both Sarah and Melissa and the University of Kentucky Community and Economic Development Initiative for providing us with this opportunity to join you. I'm going to introduce the New Ruralism Initiative and then pass the baton on to Lynn Seeley in Maine to cover a few examples from our national collection of case studies and where you'll hear directly from one of the local leaders. We'll end with thoughts on key ingredients for success. Lynn and I are part of a much broader team who've worked on this project, which began more than a dozen years ago. We're glad to respond to questions and thoughts that are sent to us because it looks like there won't be a lot of time for discussion. Next. We did make a play on the term. New urbanism gained national attention in community development as a way to combine the best of old and new design. Northern New England embraced, as much of the country has, the National Main Street program, and I can see that there are plenty of you from that program here today. It's been a very successful tool for us in its support for revitalizing our downtowns. But we're professionals working in a very rural area that aren't that many downtowns, never mind cities. Vermont's largest city, Burlington, has a population of about 40,000. Portland, Maine isn't much bigger. And Manchester, New Hampshire, our largest, has a population less than a fifth the size of Louisville. So very rural, but this is a vibrant part of the country to live and work in. It's bubbling with creative energy. So when I was teaching at the law school, our new dean from California liked to talk land use policy with me. And he was enthusing constantly about what he was seeing happening. I called it a rural renaissance, and he laughingly suggested one day that we ought to call it new ruralism. I went back to my office and Googled the term, and it was being used as a marketing term for residential developments in Georgia and Florida. And I was president of the Northern New England chapter of the American Planning Association at the time. So I brought the idea as a topic to our annual conference for discussion in 2011. Our chapter decided to take back the new ruralism term for community development to describe this as a rural renaissance that focuses on both the empowerment of individuals and community building and placemaking. We decided New Ruralism is best described rather than defined. We all know stories resonate with people better than data. Our chapter voted funds to research case studies and try to tease out common elements to help other communities replicate successes. And then we went national with support from the American Planning Association, developing a national collection of case studies and an excellent report that I think they'll be, Melissa will be posting the URL for you to look at. Next. There are patterns and elements in common among the case studies that we found. Like New Urbanism, many of the examples borrow from old traditions to implement new ideas. For example, the Rural Energy Initiative in New Hampshire spun off from old-time barn raisings, where family and friends would gather to erect each other's barns with celebration literally baked in. In this new iteration, volunteers gather at someone's home to learn how to install solar hot water, and then move on to others' homes to get the job done and continue building and honing those new skills as they radiate out to get more and more homes done. Next. So individualism within community. The case studies are creative grassroots initiatives that tackle everyday challenges, a wide range: local food systems, energy independence, climate resilience, improving economic development, social programs, and celebration. You know, people are wonderful in their variety, right? That's one of the joys of our profession. But so there's a variety in the means to the end that are found, but there are common attributes leading to success across the states, the case studies. And leadership is, of course, absolutely key, which we really want to point out is often and can be shared across the team. Next. We created a list of criteria in order to choose our case studies. We crowdsourced that set of criteria across a broader group of professionals in community planning and development who volunteered really throughout the project to give us feedback and editing. Next. And we look for case studies that support sustainable, healthy communities. It's a paradigm we really believe in, illustrated by this Venn diagram, where projects support all three spheres, fitting into the miracle middle, that where the cross benefits are helping all three spheres thrive. Next, we go to Lynn with stories.
Thanks, Peg. I'm Lynn Seeley, and I'm coming to you from Maine this morning. And as a planner who's passionate about rural communities and rural planning, I'm really thrilled to see how many people are joining this conference and thinking about the conversation and the energy that can spill over from today's presentations and conversation. So wonderful to, although I can't actually see everybody, it's wonderful to know that you're all there. So I'm continuing on here to give a little more in depth about the actual case studies that we did for our New Ruralism project. The home for all the case studies is the American Planning Association Northern New England chapter website, where the link to it is right here on the screen. And if you click on, well, if you go to the website and look under the knowledge tab, that's where you'll find our 20 case studies. To organize the stories, we grouped them into 5 general categories, trying to come up with a little bit catchy titles, focusing on food, people helping people, building jobs on our strengths, energy of volunteers, and for those projects that didn't quite fit, other innovative rural initiatives. So we'd love to hear from you if there are stories that fit these categories or other rural stories that you think would be a good addition to our library. We are working to continue to build our portfolio of case studies. Next slide. So on the website, you can also find a link to our report with stories from all 20 communities. And I just want to emphasize that the new ruralism stories are really about rural placemaking in the broad sense. They're about people working to make their community a strong, vibrant place to live, work, and enjoy. So I hope you'll take a look at the report. It's full of great ideas and a lot of inspiring stories. So please go to the website when you have a chance and take a look at the full report. Next slide. We spent a significant amount of time interviewing the people making the projects happen in these communities, and their stories are really the heart of this project. Today, we picked 4 stories to share, starting with a video, hearing directly from Amber Lamke, the woman behind Maine Grains in Skowhegan, Maine. The video was recorded in 2020 for our presentation at the annual Radically Rural Summit. It's another energizing rural conference that you may have heard about. Next slide. So here's Amber.
Hello, everyone.
Sharing her story about the Somerset Grist Mill, Maine Grains, and Skowhegan, Maine.
My name is Amber Lamke from Maine Grains in Skowhegan, Maine. I'm pleased to be able to share a little bit of our story here in Maine, developing a grist mill, which has been influential in reviving the infrastructure to make a local grain economy possible here again, to serve bakers, brewers, and chefs throughout the Northeast. Our story really begins in 2007, at a time when I was doing a lot of volunteer work with our Main Street program. Main Street is a program of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, a proven method for helping to revive regional downtowns that have fallen on hard times. And Skowhegan was coalescing around the Main Street approach when I was asked to be a volunteer with our local farmers market. Farmers markets have become quite popular and can be a centerpiece of a downtown. And in our volunteerism to grow the market, we realized that grains for bread bakers were really missing from the conversation. So together with a grassroots group of folks here in Skowhegan, we decided we would pull together bakers, brewers, wood-fired oven builders, researchers to talk about what it would take to grow grains in our region again. Maine was actually a rich producer of grains in the mid-1800s, producing far more than our population could consume at that time. So we were a net exporter of grains in the mid-1800s, back when grains were planted and harvested by hand and horse. So we knew that it was possible here, but we also recognized that we were missing the infrastructure and the know-how here in Maine. So we started an event called the Kneading Conference, KNEAD, and it became a national and globally recognized event for having conversations about the revival of regional grains. We started working with farmers and trying to understand if grains worked into their organic crop rotations on their farm, and they were. Grains are actually important for animal feed and straw, as well as for human food. And a business partner and I, and a good friend of mine, we set our sights on writing the business plan to start a mill that would solve the infrastructure challenges here in the state. We were missing key pieces of machinery to be able to crack the husky coating off of an oat, for example, and be able to eat the inside. We didn't have machines in the state anymore that could take off the weed seeds that get mixed into the grain when the combine comes through and harvests the grain. So these things were necessary to reinvigorate an economic opportunity in grains. And so we built a business plan for a couple of years between the years of 2007 and 2009. And when it came time to figure out where to put our mill, we worked with our Main Street program and local officials to consider this old county jail building in our downtown. The old Somerset County Jail, which is a Victorian structure built in the late 1800s, was coming up for sale because the county was going to move the jail outside of town to building a new jail outside of town. And this structure that we're in and ended up purchasing is a 4-story building. And what we had learned about milling was that vertical height is advantageous because you can send grain to the top of a facility and gravity feed through machines on the way down. So we worked closely with our town officials, the county government, as well as local economic developers to align our goals with the milling business and with the revival of grains to the master plan that the town had for focusing on our natural resources in this area and our local food hub, if you will. So by aligning our goals and being able to see out into the future that grains and the growing of grains was really a good fit for our region, we have open available farmland. We have organic dairy farmers nearby who are good bets at starting to grow grains in partnership with us. And we are a community that is trying to focus on its local food economy, made this a great idea for our community. We worked to communicate the vision of this mill, which was launched in 2012 under the name Maine Grains. And we've invited local officials to partner with us in every which way. So not only from the planning side and making sure that our local government was aligned in our goals here, but also to finance these kinds of projects in rural small communities. It was difficult for us to seek traditional financing at banks, and it really required a team of folks to help us get this off the ground. We ended up working very closely with some of the economic developers in our community to write grants together. Economic development agencies could serve as a fiscal sponsor, as a nonprofit to sponsor some of the grant writing and the receipt of grant funds toward the build out of this infrastructure, making it feasible for us to launch this business. In the end, Maine Grains, which is now in its 9th year of operation, we are processing flour and rolled oats and grains for bakers, brewers, and chefs throughout the Northeast. And we have really not only spurred the revival of the regional grain economy, which includes bread and beer and tortillas and even ice cream sandwich, cookies and pasta and frozen pizza dough now. We really have realized the power of an infrastructure project at the center of our town to spur more economic development and spin-off projects as inspired entrepreneurs in our community are feeling ready to take risks as we did. And also, many of these new entrepreneurs can benefit from the initial connections and frameworks that we created to be able to get this project off the ground. So while it's a challenge to tackle projects and ways of doing things in a new way, we've certainly realized the catalytic and the transformative effect that Maine Grains, Grist Mill, and all of the enterprises located in our building now and co-located with us on the campus of this old jail building have had. This project has had a uniting effect for our community. It has inspired more risk-taking, and we're thrilled to look ahead to our future of growth here in Skowhegan, which includes continuing to inspire more entrepreneurs and more businesses that highlight local food as one of our greatest assets here in rural Maine. So once again, I thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today and encourage you to hear more about our story at maingrains.com. Thanks very much.
Isn't that a cool story? And like I said, that was from 2020. So that was several years ago now, pre-pandemic. It's actually hard to capture the energy that Maine Grains has generated in Skowhegan, Maine in a short video. But as someone living in Maine, not far from Skowhegan, I can testify to the catalytic and transformative effect that Amber's vision has had on the community. How it has inspired annual events like what she mentioned, the Kneading Conference, which brings together grainiacs from all over the country. And now there's a Maine Artisan Bread Fair, which is a one-of-a-kind fair dedicated solely to bread. and how new local businesses are starting up, including the Miller's Table, which you can see a picture of here, which is a new cafe and bakery. And Good Crust is another new business which makes pizza dough from Maine Grains flour. Maine Grains celebrated its 10th anniversary in 2022 and announced plans for a new building adjacent to the mill with more space for online order fulfillment. As I mentioned, this was pre-pandemic. During the pandemic, they saw a 4,000% increase in online sales. So they're greatly expanded as a result of the pandemic. The new building will also have rental space for other entrepreneurs and a large hall, which can accommodate the winter farmers market and community gatherings. So Maine Grains has helped create the revival of a rural town from one suffering the loss of industrial jobs, persistent poverty, and declining population to now one of the country's emerging rural food hubs. By building on their unique assets and their special place among Maine's agricultural landscape, rural placemaking is happening in Skowhegan. Next slide. 3 other quick new ruralism stories that we wanted to share about, not with videos, but just a quick recap of what these projects are doing in their rural communities. In Frewsburg, New York, they are investing in children and families to bring life back into a small downtown. At the Relief Zone Community Youth Center, a group of parents wanted a safe, structured environment for their children and other town youth. They built a broad coalition with churches, town government, the school, and other parents to consider their options. A vacant church that you see in the photo here provided the answer. Within walking distance to the school, across the street from the public library, and at the town's 5 corners, today the Relief Zone Community Youth Center provides programming year-round. The center is also used for community use. With their grassroots, relationship-based approach to caring for the needs of residents, the safe and welcoming Relief Zone is at the center of a strong sense of place and community in upstate New York. Heading south, the story from the folks at Black Belt Treasures in Camden, Alabama, is about how investment in local artists and craftsmen, there are over 450 regional artists, has generated regional economic development and growth. Again, they started by building a very broad coalition. Now, with gallery space, studios, and arts education classrooms, the Cultural Arts Center is spurring new bed and breakfasts, retail, a downtown restaurant scene, and a growing tourist following. And lastly, to the far side, other side of the country, in Kodiak, Alaska, community members seeking to restore a healthy local food system while addressing food insecurity established the Kodiak Harvest Food Co-op, located in the Kodiak Island Borough, which is about 250 miles southwest of Anchorage. All food must be shipped to the community by barge or flown in by plane. Though the climate is subarctic, thanks to climate change, conditions are now more amenable to agriculture. In addition, the borough is home to one of the largest ports for fishery landings. The food co-op was created to keep food income within the community and provide a market for locally grown produce and seafood caught locally. Begun as a grassroots community economic development project, the co-op has now grown to over 400 members with a goal of building a community-owned grocery store that emphasizes locally harvested produce and seafood. These are just 4 stories that give you a glimpse into the new ruralism efforts happening across the country. At the heart of all these stories is the fundamental belief in the value of rural places as thriving communities. As a team, we were inspired by the dedication of community members to respond to local needs with self-sufficiency, creativity, and entrepreneurism. We asked community members to reflect on their process and share what they have learned so that we might share with others considering projects to enhance their rural places. So what practices contribute to and sustain the new ruralism energy? Back to Peg now to share about lessons and some of the reflections from our work.
Thanks, Lynn. Okay, so next slide. Thank you. So, these are for many of us who have worked for a long time in communities, these are reaffirmed by the case studies we pulled together. Nearly every community in that first one repeated that success is founded on building strong community-wide partnerships, really diverse partnerships, not the people you usually play with, to facilitate collaboration and not competition. And then when emergencies arrive, like a pandemic, institutions are already experienced with collaborating together and problem solving together, and the trust is there. The number two, celebration. You got to have fun. Music, dance, food, theater, comedy. So that was reported not just at a great grand finale, but all along the way, the little wins by the various task forces. It all brings more social cohesion, which is really the cement that keeps a diverse community growing together. Three, communication, we know this, but leaders emphasize that frequent, timely, clear, direct communication is vital, especially if it also allows for feedback, which social media is definitely allowing for now, helping the community feel involved and increasing their engagement. Four, changing over time, really listening, being ready and adaptable to do that. The Relief Zone Youth Center that Lynn highlighted in New York started out with a teen center, a Saturday evening program that was a mainstay for the first decade. But in its second decade, the screaming need that many of us know about is daycare. And so they've changed to daytime and daycare programs is the best way to serve their families. Number five, learn from other communities, especially starting off, but then continuing. Really, there's just a lot of learning to do on innovative financing, democratic management, grant support, even teasing out legal issues, and then continue to reach out to learn so that you continue to get re-inspired as you go along and grow and change. Number six, looking at the long-term effects and expecting them. The big changes in small communities can become a catalyst for more long-term and widespread development, like the Maine grain story, where there was just, converting an abandoned building to a functioning grist mill, but that's triggered new development, new events, bringing new tourist traffic, and really the renaissance of a local grains industry that we feel the reverberations of over here in Vermont. Next. We're an ad hoc team of volunteers, and most of us are gray-haired turning white. So besides being rewarding, and it's been a nationally award-winning project, but we're always on the lookout for new, younger volunteers to add new case studies, to just help expand that pile of case studies and link to the website. Last slide. And that's the website. So I hope there's lots of hits on it today. It's a good report. And thank you. That's it from us. I don't know if we have time for anything else.
Thank you all very much. We have hit exactly on the mark of this session. So we don't have time for a Q&A from the audience directly to you all, but I know there's been some activity in the chat. And so for those of you as panelists who are on the board, you're welcome to chime in there, or we can make sure to get those questions to you if necessary. But thank you all so much for sharing your information with us. We really appreciate your presentation and the way you're highlighting the work you're all doing in rural communities. For our attendees, we're taking about an hour break now, and we'll be back at 1 p.m. Eastern with Jeff Sigler from Revitalize or Die to share his presentation and some of his work. We thank you all for joining us for these morning sessions. Go take a break, get some food, and we'll see you back here at 1 p.m. Thank you all.